Hello there, and welcome to Speaking of Our Words, radio programming that brings you the wide range of voices, stories, and forms of local writers, and offering you some insight into their creative process. My name is Chris Deguire. I teach creative writing workshops at Columbia College, and I am your host. We have a very small crowd in the studio today. Our first reader is going to be Irene Bilak. Hello, Irene.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Irene, good. I understand you have a couple of pieces to read today?
Yes, I do.
All right, what do you have for us?
Well, I was invited to the Rotary Club in Kenosha to bring them up on the news in Ukraine, the most current news, so that's what I'm going to try to do. And then I have a piece that I did in storytelling, which is a memoir of my husband's learning different languages to become the doctor that he became.
All right, well, very good. Well, Irene Bilak, take it away.
All right. Well, as you know, Ukraine gained its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and it remains now a democracy. Ukraine ousted a corrupt government with President Yanukovych at its helm. It proved itself a courageous 45 million strong nation which demonstrated its loyalty to democratic principles and human rights with the Orange Revolution in 2004 and 2005, and the Ukrainians died. I made a mistake. Orange Revolution in 2004 and 2005, and the Revolution of Dignity in Kiev in November of 2013. Hundreds of Ukrainians died, and the corrupt President Viktor Yanukovych fled to Russia. A new government was formed with Petro Poroshenko as president, now in his second year. Parliament was successful in getting rid of the communist members of parliament as well. It is supported morally and financially by the West Europe and the United States. Representatives of the European Union have come to Ukraine and met with its government in Brussels and elsewhere to advise with many governmental issues. Currently, as you know, Crimea was seized by Vladimir Putin, a violation of the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed in Budapest in 1994. Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal under pressure from the Clinton administration and Russia. Ukraine had the third largest arsenal in the world. President Leonid Kuchma, president at the time, received a public pledge from Clinton, Yeltsin, and John Major that, quote, would respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. The memorandum further promised that Russia would refrain from the threat of force against the territorial integrity of political independence of Ukraine. As you know, one of these first gross violations has been Crimea. The war in Donbass, the eastern region of Ukraine, goes on with Putin's soldiers still fighting the Ukrainian army. The peace which exacted in Minsk a year ago is not holding. Migrants from the east are overflowing into western Ukraine. There are many problems associated with this, but somehow they are manageable. Crimean migrants were allowed to leave for Ukraine, but are now not allowed to leave for the mainland. As in Russia, Soviet times have returned to Crimea after it was annexed to Russia. The European Union and the United States have placed sanctions on Russia, which have yielded results, but have not deterred Putin's aggression. According to economic experts, Russia is suffering economically. Civil rights are at a very low point, and dissidents are killed mysteriously, are jailed, or have fled to the west. Besides Crimea, the eastern region of Ukraine and the Baltic states are nervous for their well-being. The West is worried about Putin's encroachment into the Baltic states. NATO, and the United States in particular, are sending military defense. More is needed. There are many differing opinions on the subject in the United States, of course. Putin was bombing Syrians to support Bashar al-Assad on the pretense of killing ISIS. Ukrainians have asked for heavy artillery to defend themselves against Russia. The Ukrainian diaspora has lobbied the United States Congress in this matter and is continuing to do so. Some military aid has been sent. The West's reluctance to deal stringently with Putin only emboldens him to become more aggressive. It is the opinion of many that to strike at Putin before it is too late and support Ukraine militarily might stop his aggression. Though a bit late, Clinton stopped Serbia from annihilating the Bosnians and others in Yugoslavia. Tougher actions would not necessarily start a new war, some say. The Patriarch of Russia, Patriarch Kirill of the Moscow Patriarchate, has met with Pope Francis in Cuba to discuss ways of helping persecuted Christians in Syria and elsewhere. The meeting was hailed by the media as a historical event because it's been 1,000 years since the schism of the first Christian church in 1054. Actually, it was 600 years ago in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that contact was made by the Orthodox and Rome. Western Ukrainians joined the Church of Rome at that time. Patriarch Kirill considers this event a wound in the side of the Orthodox Church. Ukrainian Catholics and Orthodox want to cut themselves off from the Moscow Patriarchate. He and his administrations are not pleased with the Ukrainian Catholic Church nor civil independence. The Moscow Patriarchate wants to control all Christians in Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church has a tight relationship with the Kremlin, and Putin's global ambitions may help explain why the meeting is really happening. In conclusion, I would highly recommend reading the book Winter is Coming: Why Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. The author is Garry Kasparov, a human rights activist and one of the world's greatest chess players for 20 years. He fled when he was able and now lives safely in New York with his family. Kasparov writes many, many books about human rights and Russia's trampling of them. Right now, the American-born Ukrainian Natalia Yareshko, who is finance minister, is put to a test by maybe becoming Ukraine's Prime Minister of Ukraine. We are very, very happy that things are still fine in Ukraine, that is still a democracy, but some of the oligarchs are fighting against each other in the very worst way. So that is some of the current events that I have gathered. Now I'm going to do something completely different, and it's called The Story of Dr. Roman Bilak's Immigration. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Parlez-vous français? Говорите по-украински? To communicate and become a citizen, you should be ready to learn the language of the country in which you work and live. Long ago, in 1929, a little boy was born to proud parents and their two older daughters. The eldest was 14, the second daughter was 7. Joy and adulation abounded, as the baby boy seemed a gift. They christened him in their local church and named him Roman, or Roman in English, as we say. The baby flourished and grew to a fine little boy with the love of his family. Grandmother and grandfather lived only a few houses away. As the town was small in a beautiful countryside, little Roman had much room to play and learn. His parents were both teachers in the local school, so they had many wonderful challenges for their only son. Reading everything from newspapers to books became a lifelong hobby. Much attention to the boy's learning and nurturing was given by his mother, and especially his father. Father took his only son for walks, played with him, and told him stories. Because he was fluent in several languages, Father taught his son to speak and read 2 languages, his native Ukrainian and one other. Father had been an officer in the Austro-Hungarian Imperial Army and spoke Austrian German fluently, so he taught his son German. In play and in work, father and son spoke the 2 languages. Roman attended the local Ukrainian school and was an exemplary student. Teachers and students praised him. All the boys wanted to play with Roman, and whether it was in school games or volleyball. Time flew and elementary school was over. There was no high school in the town of Pomoriane, so the good student, Roman, had to leave his parents and go to high school many kilometers away. There he boarded with a family, which was a slight acquaintance. This was not an auspicious placement for the young boy. He was only 13 years old, a hard time to be away from family. Though both parents visited and brought delicious homemade meals to augment the room and board they paid, it was never enough. When hungry, Roman gathered berries in the field. Most of the time he was hungry and miserable, but he still shone in his classroom and was studious without complaining. When no one was looking, he cried himself to sleep many a night. His tenure at the high school did not last very long, as the Nazi German army occupied western Ukraine, battling the onslaught of the Soviet communists. Roman, it is time for you to be brave again. Our family has to emigrate. We will unfortunately have to leave your grandparents as they are too elderly to travel. When the war is over, we will come back and see them again. With sister's husband's help, the family was soon on its way west. Many families left Pomoriane as well as from all over Ukraine. They traveled by train and landed in Germany. Roman's brother-in-law was a doctor, had many connections in Western Europe where he had studied medicine, and therefore very helpful with the difficult journey for all of them. In the city of Bayreuth, Germany, Ukrainian immigrants lived in a displaced persons camp where Roman could resume his high school education. Here he became known by some of his friends as a walking encyclopedia. He made many friends with his witty sayings and sharp mind. Many of them remember him still. But fate had something more in store for him. Being a Catholic and an excellent student, he qualified for the Pope's scholarship for gifted immigrant students called Pax Romana. Roman applied soon was on his way to Louvain, Belgium, at Louvain University to study medicine. His father had always told him, "Ram, there are many ways to make a living, but there will always be a need for a doctor." As a good son, he heeded his father's advice. Roman's parents and sisters with their families were left behind to find their own way later to the United States. You tell me, how does a 17-year-old student, fluent in Ukrainian and German, study medicine in a French-speaking university in Belgium without knowing French? Very carefully and methodically, I'd say, with a great deal of patience, translations, dictionaries, and kind, helpful professors who saw a good student. They and some French students helped Ram become an outstanding student with a degree in medicine at graduation, summa cum laude, no less. By the end of his university study, Roman was, of course, fluent in French. A beautiful Dutch girl whom Roman met at a special event for students became his wife soon after graduation. Another question, how do you speak with a Dutch girl? German came in handy, as Dutch is a close relative. They managed. She also taught him English, which was her third language. A little communication with French. Kissing also must have helped. Of course, they married. With immigration organizations' help and the assistance of his influential brother-in-law once more, the young couple was able to get visa and passports to the United States of America. The year was 1953. At age 25, Roman was the youngest doctor to practice medicine in North Dakota after he had completed his internship in South Dakota and a crash course in English. The local press welcomed him and wrote about the new doctor and his wife who had come to their town to practice. The young family became citizens of the United States with full privileges after they passed qualifying tests. Roman completed his residency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Sadly, Roman never saw his father again. On the way to Havre, Montana, where Roman's sister lived, his father died of stomach cancer. Bereaved, Roman, however, became reunited with his mother and sisters and their families. It was a most joyous reunion, as you can well imagine. As his career progressed, Roman took on position as doctor-surgeon in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 1960 and was now a father of 4, 2 girls and 2 boys. Surgery at St. Catherine's Hospital, private practice, and 4 children kept the young doctor busy. He was active in professional organizations, became chief of surgery for a time, and represented his profession in many capacities. Some of you may have been Roman's patients or children of his patients. Many a person has stopped him in local stores or other venues and said, "Doctor, my mother says you delivered me." Or, "Do you remember me, Doc? I was your patient. You cured me of stomach cancer." Nurses and doctors recognize him still in and out of the hospital and remember him fondly as an excellent doctor with a warm and friendly bedside manner. He was known especially for his very thorough examinations of patients. Though retired and no longer practicing, Roman is still a member of the Wisconsin Medical Society, Kenosha branch. He is also a member of the Ukrainian National Association of Doctors of North America, Chicago branch. If you have not yet guessed, the man I'm speaking of is Dr. Roman Bilak, my husband. Gute Nacht, Dobranich, bonsoir.
Irene, Bilak, those are wonderful. Well, thank you very much. You are listening to Speaking of Our Words. All right, and then next up is Troy McDonald. Hello, Troy.
How you doing?
Good, Troy. Troy, what do you have for us today?
Well, this is a piece that I wrote for my college course that I'm in this semester. We had to interview someone that was close to us about the differences in culture between 2 times. And I have a really unique situation. My mother had me at 41 years old, so she was a part of the civil rights era, and had me in probably, or perhaps, the most important time since, the digital era. So it's kind of these contrasts between these 2 eras, and so I wrote about it in this piece.
Oh, okay, well, very good. Well, Troy McDonald, take it away.
I had a hell of a time figuring out how to start this paper. How do you encapsulate the cultural significance of perhaps the most culturally significant time in American history? Not only that, but do it with respect to your mother. I interviewed Susan McDonald, who grew up in the 1950s and 60s. My mother had me at 41, making her a teenager in the 60s and the most pivotal time in America. She then raised 2 children, my brother and I, and arguably the most important time period since, the digital era. We sat down and chatted about the differences in education and our world from a cultural perspective. My mother grew up in Harvey, Illinois, a Chicago suburb that rose to prominence in the 1960s. She had 1 brother and 1 sister. My grandfather worked as a server on the Santa Fe Railroad, and my grandmother was a stay-at-home mother before taking a part-time job at the Social Security office. My mom attended Lowell Middle School in Harvey, Illinois, where she walked to school every day with the same group of friends, a luxury many students do not have today anywhere near Chicago. "Yes, we walked, honey," she murmured with her calming voice, the same voice that told me to zip up my jacket when I waited for the bus when I went to middle school. It was a different time. Contrary to popular belief, she said that the time that was most racist for her was her middle school age. I was judged because I was light-skinned. People said I would get more advantages because of my skin color. This changed during her high school years, as the blacks united to feel a part of the civil rights movement. I asked her what changed. She said, "I became more aware. Everyone was doing it." Herein lies the biggest conundrum of the 1960s. Many would argue that there was more of a collectivist culture. The hippies fought for their rights together, and so did the blacks and the LGBT community, and so on. However, my mother remembers it differently. I grew up knowing in my soul that I could have been a teacher. I wanted to be an individual, she said, pausing because it still touched a raw nerve. But I figured a man would take care of me. He would work on the Coke plant or the GM plant, and I wouldn't have to think about that. She was agitated, wishing she had thought more about being an individual than following the group. The popular kids were the kids with the athletic backgrounds, those who played sports. Some things never change. There was a real sense that there was a lot of power there. She knew it was unfair, but she reveled in it. My best friend's brother was a star player, Troy, she said, the gleam in her eye palpable. I was smart, but I couldn't let on. I wish I didn't care about people like you don't seem to care. Said in a way knowing full well that I deeply do care, but I don't let on. Her goal only to fix a mistake that she sees repeating itself, subtly. Girls were expected to be ladylike, expected to serve a man and help build their dreams. Boys were expected to be masculine and treat ladies with respect. We respected authority, she said. We were afraid to have fights on the school ground. I then told my mother about the substitute teacher I know from our area who quit his job because students threw rocks at him. Her face became somber. She said, "We were rebels, that is true, but we didn't do it at the expense of our parents and authority." We then delved into the most personal and the most poignant topic of the conversation. There were certain things I went to my mother for and went to my father for. Those were the roles they played, she said. Troy, you were robbed of that. I grew up in a single-family home. My father was a Vietnam War vet who came home with PTSD. He struggled for years. I saw him maybe 5 times in my life. My mother continued. Let me be clear. Not your father, but a father would have benefited you. I don't know if I agree with her, and I don't know if that will ever change. My mother is a powerful force in my life and someone that I admire. I asked what she wishes her generation would teach ours. Respect. Respect for the classroom and for life. The women out here have no respect for themselves today. The men don't have jobs and they don't treat the ladies right. The drugs aren't worth it. The girls and the crazy lifestyle, it's not worth it. My mom has spent 30 years in the social services sector, so she would know a little bit something about that. I flipped the question. What could my generation teach yours? She said, technology. It's coming, and to keep up with it. Honey, she continued, I wish I could help make college easier for you. You have to work for everything you have, and I feel guilty I couldn't do more. I chimed in. Mom, you seem to be grappling with holding on to like the old customs and trying to stay in the now. Very much so, she said. And yet with a quiet, somber voice, she said, it's so much harder for you, maybe in part because you are doing it so right, and I never thought about it. I don't live my life in fear for you, but I'm fearful for future generations. I got lucky with you. Mom, is there anything else you'd like to add? Yes. You don't do this, but I'm tired of seeing young kids out in the streets here with pajama pants. Point well taken, Mom. Point well taken. Troy, one more thing. There were thugs then. There were thugs then, and there were ladies who didn't respect themselves then. The clothes have just changed. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Troy. And our interview ended. Every generation faces this dilemma when time has passed them by, and they have to face that their world is not their world anymore. It's a very low-culture, context-based world, one where the future is all that matters. In other high-context countries, such as China, my mom would be revered as the 66-year-old firecracker that she is. However, in the U.S., she feels dejected and apart from her son, whom she wants to help. There is a level of disconnection that I don't know if any other generation has felt before. It's a new world, one she can't engage in. It's perhaps the most frightening thing she can imagine. If things do indeed stay the same, then I too will face this dilemma. I'll be going to watch Taylor Swift perform at the local Potawatomi casino, wishing that time could slow down, facing the fourth quarter in this match we call life. Not dwelling on the current, but on the mistakes of the past. Each generation gets a little more accepting, a little closer to being naked, or so it seems, and a little closer to being yesterday's news. I'll enjoy culture while I can, because in a few short years, I won't be able to change it. Just observe it. The thought mars my mind. It haunts every fiber in my being.
That was also very wonderful. Troy McDonald, thank you very much. You are listening to Speaking of Our Words. All right, and then I'm going to read an excerpt from my novel in progress here, The Worst Summer Job grocery store novel that I've been reading excerpts from for the past 2 years now or so. But I think I finally figured out the elements that are missing to this story. And I think I've discovered some connective tissues here. So you're probably going to be hearing a few more excerpts from this over the next few months. But in this particular excerpt, to catch you up what you need to know, this will take place in the last third of the book. To understand this, you need to know that Jason and Courtney have just started dating. It's the fall of 1999. They are seniors in high school, and they work together at a grocery store. A week earlier to this event, they went to homecoming together. Jason is on the football team. And at homecoming, Jason had an incident that reminded him of how his older brother was killed 2 years prior to the start of the story. Jason has also been confiding with a coworker at the store. His name is Bob, about his feelings about his brother and about Courtney and all sorts of things. And Bob has made some suggestions. Phase one of Bob's suggestions being he asked Courtney to share his locker, which she has accepted. So I think that's what you need to know for this to make sense. This is taking place Friday night after a game where Jason's team was totally annihilated. And Courtney's there to pick him up, take him out to eat. It was kind of cold as Courtney waited for Jason after the game, watching various players get in their cars and leave. A lot emptier than usual since the school canceled all the rest of the fall Friday dances because of the homecoming fiasco. That didn't seem really fair. She saw Jason with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder as usual, walking slower than usual. She wondered how she should approach the game. Should she say anything at all? Jason himself hadn't played terribly, but the team got scorched. She smiled as he got closer, noticing his leather jacket was unsnapped. He had to be cold, just got out of the shower, his hair probably wet. He noticed she had parked alongside his car, which could make phase 2 easier, but he didn't know if tonight was a good time to do that. "Hi," he said. "Nice game, huh?" She rocked on her heels. "Yeah, it was bad," she said. He hugged her and then put his bag in his trunk. "You hungry?" she asked. "Starved. The guys are going for pizza." "Oh, where?" "I don't want to go with the guys." "Oh, okay, well, good, because I have a treat for you." "Oh, yeah? Well, this could be interesting." She drove him down 75th Street, past the McDonald's and the Ace Hardware, to Carney's Drive-In. "I've never been here," he said, as she pulled into the lot. "It's like DQ, but better." "How's that? DQ is pretty good." "Well," she said, parking, "I used to work here, so I know all the secrets." "You worked here?" "For a few months. It kind of sucked, though, and my boss was a dick, so I quit. But I got a few friends work here." Jason could see a few people inside and hoped no one from the team would show up. The pizza place and others were a lot closer to the school, so probably not. An older couple exited as they went in, Courtney holding the door open for them before they entered. Jason liked that it was bright inside and smelled of grease and fries. As he looked at the menu above and behind the counter, a girl poked her head from the back and called out "Hi" to Courtney, who mouthed back, "This is him," pointing toward Jason, who didn't notice any of it. The girl glanced over at Jason and gave Courtney a thumbs up. Courtney half smiled, half grimaced. She was glad Kate was still there. "The burgers are the best in town," Courtney said as Jason worked on a decision. "You have to hold them with both hands." "Well, I got to get one of them." He ordered a burger, fries, and a soda. She ordered a caramel cashew sundae. They took a booth by the side window, and Jason tossed his jacket on the bench before sliding in. "Did you sit with my dad again at the game?" he asked. "Yup," she nodded slowly. "Learned even more swear word combos." Jason laughed. "I warned you." "Well, not that first time. He doesn't say he's sorry anymore." "Do you laugh?" "Of course. Sit on my dick is hilarious." "Yeah, I don't even know what that means." "I know, right?" "See, that's why he doesn't apologize. You laugh. Means he likes you." He glanced out the window at the little used car dealer next door. "If my mom was there, he wouldn't say anything. She hates his swearing." Courtney reached across the table and took his hand. "I hope she comes to one of these last games," he said quietly. "I do too." Their food arrived, delivered by Courtney's friend. She set trays in front of them. "Jason, this is Kate, my best friend." Jason looked up at her, very tall, very skinny, with glasses. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said, sounding awkward, and left. Jason looked down at the burger, and indeed, it looked like you needed both hands. It was so greasy and sloppy looking. She watched him slide his hands under it, pick it up, and take a bite, and she grinned. "What do you think?" she asked, eager for his review. "How have I never eaten here before?" "Good, huh? This is great." The cheese just melted all over everything, the bun soaking up all the juices. He looked at the gigantic sundae in front of her and said, "That thing's huge, too." "I figured we'd split it. This is my fat content for the month." "You actually worry about that. You look great." And he meant that. "Oh," she said, blushing a bit, that's sweet. "You're in great shape." "That's actually not true," she said. "Just because I'm small doesn't mean I'm in good shape. I mean, you should see me in gym class. Between tennis and swimming, I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm the only senior, I think. I knew I should have taken it last year." "But you're a good bowler." "That's different," she said, holding up her finger. "You don't need to be in shape to bowl." "True. And I've been doing it a long time, and it's something I actually like. If I don't go away to school, I might bowl with my mom and dad next year." "Have you thought about that much?" She shrugged as he stuffed fries in his mouth. "I want to go to that school in Chicago. I don't know." "You should see your counselor," he said, shaking a fry at her. "She's so weird." "She's a nice lady." "Well, what are you going to do?" "I don't know," he said with a laugh. "See, we got some time." "Well, most applications are due in February." "I know. I got to talk with my folks, too. My dad hasn't pressured me at all." She snuck some of his fries, and after he finished the burger, she fed him chunks of the sundae. They talked about school and the store a bit, and Jason asked her about this place, about her friend, and they laughed a lot. As he watched her scrape up the sides of the bowl to get as much ice cream as she could, he felt pretty good about phase 2. But as she drove him back to the school lot, he started overthinking it. When would he do it? What would he say? What would Bob do? When she pulled up alongside his car, she got out, wanting to give him a hug, and that was his in. She followed him around to his driver's side and stuffed her hands in his pockets and looked up at the lot light and said, "It's gotten colder." "Yeah," he said, and unsnapped his leather jacket. He turned to face her and slung it behind her and over her shoulders. "Thanks," she said, wondering what he was doing. "But I'm going to be home in a few minutes." "No," he said, guiding her arms into the sleeves, his own arms feeling cold since he only had on a t-shirt. "I want you to have it." Oh my God, she thought. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. She felt her legs tingling and shaking. Was he really doing this? She watched him as he snapped it up, the jacket way too long, coming down to her knees, the arms drooping. "Little long," he said. This is literally amazing. You'll accept it?" "Accept it? Wear it? I'll sleep in it? No, wait, I won't sleep in it." She laughed, stumbled back and forth, and said, "Yes, I accept it." She clutched at the buttons, looked down at her legs sticking out, twisting one to see how it all hung. "One more thing," he said, holding up a finger, then going into the car, turning the keys to the accessories position, started up the tape deck. Aerosmith's Dream On played softly. "What's this?" she asked as he gathered her in his arms. "I owe you a dance. We didn't get this last week." He hugged her, she hugged him, and they rocked side to side under the lot light. She wanted to cry. "This is like out of a book or something," she said softly. "Or movie. You know, I'm still going to get you to read a book by the end of the year," she said, socking him lightly on the back. If he got to feel this way with her all the time, he'd even consider reading that scarlet letter book she talked about at the Renaissance Fair. Well, maybe. She actually didn't care if he read anything. Nothing could dampen how she felt right then. This was the most perfect thing anyone had ever done for her, and she had no idea how to process any of it. Bob is a genius, Jason thought. A real genius. And that's the excerpt that I've got. So, all right, so Irene had to leave us, so it is now just Troy and I in the studio. And I thought we would talk about today, you know, Troy, after listening to your piece and just thinking about culture in general, and I know a lot of the essays and stories that you write have a lot of pop culture in them, and I know a lot of the things that I write have some pop culture in them. What I thought we'd talk about, though, would be this idea of the sort of timelessness of stories, you know, whether the stories are really old, maybe written 30, 40 years ago, or things that are very current. I just got to thinking, you know, most of my class this semester, they're all real young kids. They're only 18, 19 years old, and they don't really know a day of their lives too much where the internet did not exist. So I'm just curious, you know, I've got my own 2 cents to throw in here. But I thought we would talk about this idea of like the sort of timelessness of stories, you know, with you speaking of, you know, culture in your piece about your mom and about the 60s and my book here taking place in 1999, that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on this idea of the timelessness of stories? I mean, do stories need to be timeless to make sense? Or, you know, just because a story doesn't have a cell phone in it, even in an era where cell phones exist, I mean, does that make a story good or bad? Or, you know, I guess what makes a story timeless in your opinion?
Right. Well, first of all, amazing job. Great story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Great. You always give credit to everyone else, and you deserve credit. That was fantastic.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I don't think it has to be timeless to make sense, but it does have to be great to be timeless. And, you know, I was going to mention the story about, this is music related, but still, Kanye West did a song with Paul McCartney last year and Rihanna. And people were tweeting, wow, Kanye West really gave this Paul McCartney guy a great start. And those were the tweets. And they were and Paul McCartney was a member of the Beatles, you know, and people still didn't know. So I think in a way, you know, I think timeless is almost subjective. I mean, you look at Bach, right? And the music that he did, that was classic. We know who Bach is, but we're not necessarily, he's not mainstream front and center. It's not what we're talking about. And I think that the way that people write stories, you can expect a shelf life of maybe 100 years where you'll be an example. But then even then, you kind of move away. And you're revered as great. But I think being timeless is something that's harder to achieve now than it ever has been before because of cell phones. And you mentioned, you know, technology and kids not knowing anything other than the internet. My mother, who I wrote about in this story, one of the first, I was in the newspaper in our local hometown of Vernon Hills, Illinois. And the first photo that I remember seeing myself in the paper, I was 5 years old, and me and my brother were sitting in front of a computer. And that was the first, I've always been around software, computers. It was Windows 95, but, we had AOL. And I remember going to Walmart and picking up the little AOL discs that would give you the latest update to America Online. So I can relate to that. But I will say that with that comes the responsibility on the media, comes the responsibility on storytellers to always strive for excellence. Because when you're inundated with so much content, it's hard to be great. And so you find a lot of artists like Adele or, authors like maybe a J.K. Rowling who write a kind of above the fray. And then you have your romance novels and you have, who write, 50 Shades, those who write for now. Will 50 Shades be timeless? Maybe. Will Harry Potter? Probably, for sure. So I think it's all subjective what timeless is, because everyone has their own preference.
Yeah, I think I would totally agree with that, and not knocking the 50 Shades of Grey and the romance, because there's always going to be an audience for that sort of escapism, and there are so many websites devoted to how can I write my romance story in 30 days or less, and make $1 million off this thing. But real quickly, I was thinking when you were talking about Paul McCartney, I remember when George Harrison died. That was about 10 or 12 years ago now. And I remember when I was working at the grocery store here in Kenosha, the day after that, and me and some other guys were talking about it, and one of the younger kids, was maybe 20 at the time, give or take, listening in, and he stopped and asked us, "Who's George Harrison?" I just wanted to smack the kid. But I don't know. I like the idea of having to strive for excellence. I don't think any artist, sets out with the goal in mind to be timeless. I think they're trying to be true to the story or the form or the whatever it is that they've got, at least for the first draft that they've got. And I think that's in my case especially. I don't think that I strive for the timelessness until I've got something that I feel is something that I want to eventually share, and then, because most of my things take place in very specific time periods. Like, with this book right here, 1999, I know several people who had cell phones in 1999, but they were the big hulking, notebook-sized phones. I was one of the last ones on the planet to actually get a cell phone myself several years later. So I think what I'm always striving to do, whether it is, something of the times, whether it's pop culture or something digital or whatever, I think that I'm always trying to make sure that I'm serving the story the way it needs to be served. The characters and the point of view that I've chosen, that the story itself comes first. And I think, at least in the way I write in my process, when I'm doing something like that, I feel then if I'm doing all that well, if I'm telling the story well, or I'm looking for the excellence in the story, then I think the timelessness is just going to come out of that. I believe. And people aren't going to care one way or the other, because I think, I would still think that 20 years from now that people will still know that, up until about 1995, people didn't have cell phones and had personal computers. They should be learning that in history classes, I would hope, but I think that's why, so many stories like, we were talking about earlier, like, like Shakespeare or Melville, or James Joyce, and why we still read and study these types of stories. And I definitely think that we're still going to be reading Harry Potter books in the next 100 years, because I think those stories are very much timeless, and it's never really, I don't think it's ever really said in those books the time in which it takes place. But I know with this new movie that's coming out, I know it takes place in the early 1900s, so we're getting an actual time frame then. But I just think that if you're serving the story well, and you're trying to be, as excellent about it as you can, I think the timelessness is just going to come out of it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think that if you do all the fundamentals well, and I also think that you have to be around people and read the greats, which is a part of why I do think it's going. We're going to read Shakespeare and some of the greats, is because in order to be great, you have to sharpen yourself with the best. Iron
Yeah.
sharpens iron, and so when I think of the some of my influences. Again, I read more biographies. That's kind of, I'm not even going to, lie and say I'm like a Shakespearean expert. I'm not. But, when I read Jan Le Van Zandt or Maya Angelou or some of those people and their works, those are greats that I think will stand the test of time. And people may not read them for their, and might be controversial, but they might not read them for their content. In essence, just like I'm going to pick out a Maya Angelou book, people might only pick them to sharpen their own skill. And that, I don't know how people, unless it's taught, in education or continued through that, and more than likely it will. But, past high school or college, people who really are going to stick to these works are going to be people who are going to be in that field. It's kind of like why, people, Michael Jackson used to say, well, I wrote Thriller, it came from the sky. Well, he was around Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye from the time he was 5 years old. I mean, he was going to be great. It was going to be timeless whenever, as he got to Thriller and beyond. And I feel the same way about, future writers and, the literature of our histories. People are going to read them because that's undeniably great. And people want to be great.
Yeah, I think if you surround yourself with the good stuff, if you study the good stuff, I think good stuff is going to come out of you,
Right.
My class this semester, one of the novels we're reading is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books. It's a very depressing book. Nothing good happens to anybody in this book. And I got a number of students who are really getting into it. And a number of students who are really, really struggling with it. And that's pretty typical.
And see, that's actually a good question because you're in education. So do you feel like you have this responsibility to kind of bring these great works of literature to the next generation?
Yeah, I definitely feel a responsibility. I'm also trying to get as many different voices and stories to the students as possible, because a lot of the students taking this class may never take another writing class again. Out of the 18 students I have this semester, I've only got 3 creative writing majors who are going to move on through the program. A number of other students also say they're going to take at least one more class they would like to. But I would say more than half of them might never take a creative writing class again. So, I'm always thinking, how in the world am I going to get across them everything I love and enjoy about writing in a 15-week semester? And I just got to realize that's not going to happen. But when I read a book like, The Bluest Eye, and even though it's set, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago now, maybe even longer than that. I think what makes that story work, though, is the fact that the events that happen, and I guess the themes of the story, are just, those types of things are always going to happen. Unfortunately, husbands are going to beat their wives, and fathers are going to rape their daughters, and those are very unpleasant subjects. But it's not like that's something that's not going to happen anymore. And even though reading about it can be very, very difficult, there's also part of the language, in those older books as well that just, it's a lot different, than the way we speak nowadays. Or a book like Moby Dick, a good portion of that book is in an English that we don't even speak anymore, and words and language that we don't use anymore. But the story itself still works. And if you can find the story in there, and that's, in my classes, I'm trying to teach the students how to read as writers, so they can maybe discover that these are definitely themes and types of stories that are written about over and over and over again. And I think once I can get that across to them, there's a whole different level of appreciation for a lot of these older stories, as it were. that they're going to get from them, you know. But I think it's just always going to be, you know, some students are going to get it and love it, and some students are just going to not get it, and some students are just going to totally loathe it, you know. And I usually juxtapose that with the much more current book. I usually work with one of my colleagues at Columbia College. I usually read one of their books, you know, so they've got a juxtaposition of voices, subject matter, and, you know, eras in time when these stories were written, you know. And then the joy of that is just seeing how that translates into their own writing, you know, any of those things that maybe carry over that they're picking up from an older book like The Bluest Eye, you know, or something, you know, in other classes where I teach Melville and Gogol as part of the curriculum, to see what kind of stuff sort of seeps into their own writing. And that's the fun of it. And that's, I think, when they gain a much better understanding and much more respect for some of these older stories. At least that's what I'm noticing.
And that's interesting because, you know, you look, you know, we have a few minutes left here, but, you know, you think of the medium is where I think we're going to have the biggest challenge, you know, when we talk about being timeless, because the internet, whatever, is a mile long and an inch deep. You can get, you know, everyone's talking about the same thing. So how do you kind of break through the noise and break through the clutter and create something that's great and get people's attention? So will we even be able to create new great things? Is, you know, especially in literature, which, you know, I mean, besides 50 Shades of Grey, what book has been the national zeitgeist in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I know.
You know,
right?
I mean, since Harry Potter, I mean, I'm talking national zeitgeist everywhere. There hasn't been a book that's done that probably since 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, I would agree.
So how do we create these great things? How do we find them? So we might be in a position where we don't, I don't know. Do we create? I mean, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think we definitely can still create greatness. You know, I think it's this idea of being, you know, again, true to your story, you know, and if you are true to the story and honest to the story, whether it's something based on real life or not, I think the greatness and the timelessness is going to, is going to definitely show out of that. You know, I've heard many teachers, you know, as when I came up as a student of creative writing as well, many teachers say, you know, not to like shock us or disappoint us, but, you know, one, not all of us are going to be best-selling writers. We're not all going to make tons of money with our writing. I've had some of those same teachers and others just say that, you know, practically every story has already been told. And even had one teacher said you can break down almost every story to person comes to town, person leaves town. You know, the whole series of Bill Bixby's The Incredible Hulk is based on that premise, I believe. But by breaking it down to that base of a level, I think it just, you know, comes down to, you know, well, what's your version of that story, or what makes your story different? You know, and sometimes that has to do with your voice, you know, the way you tell a story. Maybe you tell a story in a non-traditional type of way, you know, or you do a lot of playing around with time. Or you manipulate time on the page somehow. I think what has got me very curious is the attention spans of people these days. I mean, even, you know, perhaps someone like me who's a little bit older, who is not as, you know, tech savvy as a lot of people, but, you know, my attention span has certainly gotten shorter in the last 10 years. And I really do think there's going to be a place for novels and literature. I think we're always going to be studying what so many people consider to be the classics, but I also think that there are certainly new classics, and I think people's attention spans are going to be enough to where they're going to get stories and they're going to be able to sit and read a book, if not all in one sitting. But I think they're going to, you know, fingers crossed that this is going to happen, that they're still going to find joy in sitting and reading a book, or reading a book on their Kindles or their laptops, or whatever.
Our fingers crossed, so are Barnes and Noble. Okay.
Yeah.
No, and I think you're right. I think that we're always going to be looking, you know, for grades, but the attention span, we do videos here at WGTD, and we get analytics from Facebook or YouTube, and we see, and yes, it's different. I can only imagine a book, but if we post a 30-second video, we see people drop off at 5 seconds or 7 seconds.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything in 5 to 7 seconds. I mean, as far as news we're a WPR, NPR affiliate, so we can't tell a story in 7 seconds. So it always poses this challenge. What is the obligation of us to be a news-telling organization, which is number one, but also become a social brand? And so I think authors are going to face that kind of dilemma where it's like, how do I tell this story in a way that people are going to receive this message without totally turning them off, taking so much of their time, and still being great? I think that's probably where we're going to go in the next 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I would think so, but I think some of that really hasn't changed all that much. I mean, you say 5 to 7 seconds into a video before they, switch to something else. That scares the hell out of me. As a writer, I mean, how many pages is that before someone decides whether or not they're going to continue reading a book or give up on a book? 5 to 7 seconds, that's not even half a page. So it's this idea of, one of those literary tropes you always talk about is like the hook, and how are you going to reel people in, in that, not necessarily first chapter, but now it's like first page, to get their attention. I think that's something that as writers we've always sort of struggled with, but I still think people are going to find the stories that they're drawn to. So I know this is something that we could definitely be talking about like for another hour.
I know, yeah.
I think this is a pretty good topic. So we might bring this back when we actually have more people in the studio next time. I like this idea of the timelessness of stories.
Yeah.
So, all right, very good. So we are just about out of time. So. Let's see. For those of you who are interested out there in potentially joining the Kenosha Writers Guild, the Kenosha Writers Guild meets every third Thursday over at the Hedberg Library at Carthage College at 6:30 p.m. It is an open group meeting. It is free and open to the public. And if you have stories you want to bring in, just bring them all in. Otherwise, just sit and listen to the people already there reading their own work. And on the second Thursdays of the month is when they have guest lectures and in-depth critiques and all sorts of things. So please check out the Kenosha Writers Guild on the internet at kenosha-writersguild.com. This show is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. If you have any questions or comments or wish to participate on this program, please visit kenosha-writersguild.com and come to one of our meetings. Please visit the Facebook and YouTube pages for this show, Speaking of Our Words, and feel free to leave a comment. Thanks to Dave Cole and WGTD, Steve Brown and Nita Hunter, our engineer Troy McDonald, Lisa Adamowitz-Kless, and the Kenosha Writers Guild. Thank you very much to Irene Bilak and Troy. This is Chris Deguire, and the world needs your stories. We will see you again. Thank you for listening.